What would you do if the person you just insulted turned out to be the one holding your future in their hands? One slap, one quiet night. A luxury car pulled over on an empty street. She thought he was just another black man who didn't look like he belonged. But seconds later, he calmly pulled out a badge with the words Chief of Police, and that was only the beginning of a lesson she would never forget. But before we dive in, do you think prejudice only comes from bad people? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe so you won't miss the stories that reveal truth in ways you never expected. Now rewind the clock. One night, Marble Crest Avenue. This is where the story begins. Patrol officer Scarlett Monroe pulled over a luxury black sedan on Marble Crest Avenue, technically for a minor signal violation that most officers would have ignored during a cold, quiet night shift. But to Scarlett, the law was the law, and sometimes a cop just needed to remind herself that she was still in control. The air was sharp, the wind slicing between rows of sleeping houses. The street was so silent you could hear the street lamp wires humming overhead. As Scarlett stepped out of her patrol car, she had no idea that just a few more footsteps would completely change how she saw herself. The engine purred quietly as she approached. When the window rolled down, she saw a middle-aged black man, hands calmly resting on the steering wheel, a perfectly tailored suit, sharp eyes that didn't flinch, and the one thing that knocked the breath out of her. He wasn't afraid. No excuses, no panic, just a steady calm that made her feel like she was the one being assessed. Seconds later, Scarlett ordered him out of the car, and at that very moment, when her hand touched the back of his coat to assert dominance, something shifted. That familiar feeling of control vanished. In its place, an instinctive reaction. Her hands snapped through the air and struck his face with a cold, cracking sound. It wasn't just a slap. It was the sound of something deeper breaking, like the shattering of her own moral compass. And then, he pulled something out she never saw coming. A badge. Two words that made her heart drop. Chief of Police. That man was Gabriel Vaughn. Not some stranger trying to slip past the law. Not someone trembling in the face of authority. He was a middle-aged black man, standing beneath the streetlights in the dead of night, with a kind of quiet confidence so steady, it made people uneasy. Scarlett glanced at his crisp navy blue suit, the silver watch on his wrist catching the glow of the street lamp. He didn't apologize. He didn't plead. He didn't even breathe too loudly. He just sat there, as if everything was unfolding exactly the way he expected. And that was what threw Scarlett off, because deep down, without even realizing it, she had been waiting for something familiar. A lowered gaze, a flicker of guilt. Something that said, "I've done wrong." Something she had been trained to recognize. She reached out, not to threaten, just muscle memory. But the moment Gabriel turned slightly, a faint scar appeared on the back of his neck. Scarlett froze, not out of fear, but because what she saw was something she never expected. A healed wound, likely from a fight long ago, or worse, an old encounter with an officer who didn't hold back. Yet here he was, not flinching, not reminding her, not throwing bitterness back in her face, not demanding fairness. He simply stood there, did what was right, and let her be the one in the wrong. And it was that calm, that unbearable calm, that tightened something deep in Scarlett's chest. Not because he spoke up, but because he chose not to. Scarlett Monroe had never felt out of control. She'd faced armed suspects, broken up fights in the rain, stood her ground in the darkest parts of the city. But no one had ever made her feel smaller, with nothing but a silent stare. Gabriel Vaughn was still standing there, shoulders steady, eyes unwavering. He wasn't resisting, but he wasn't backing down either. "Hands on the trunk," she ordered, her voice dipping. Not a routine command anymore, but a quiet test of authority. He complied, slowly, calmly, without a word. Scarlett stepped closer, her eyes locked on his back. Then, like lightning striking through memory, an image flashed across her mind. Her father, also a cop, attacked years ago by a man who looked eerily similar. That night, he nearly didn't come home. And in that split second, She moved before thought could catch up. Her hand flew up, not because Gabriel had resisted, but because of a fear she hadn't realized she'd been carrying her entire life. The sound of the slap cracked through the night, dry, sharp, like something deep inside her had just fractured. Gabriel didn't speak. He turned slowly, deliberately, no rage, no wounded pride, just something quieter than anger, disappointment. Then he reached into his coat. Scarlett stepped back, sweat suddenly slick on her palms. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out something that made her world stop cold. A badge. And on it, the words that knocked the breath out of her. Chief of Police, Gabriel Vaughn. Scarlett stared at the badge in his hand as if it were the only thing still real in a reality that had just collapsed. Gabriel Vaughn, Chief of Police, Northmore Division. Not someone from another department, not a civilian with powerful connections, but her direct superior. In that moment, there were no sirens, no backup storming in to smooth things over, just Gabriel's unreadable gaze, and the wind weaving through Marble Crest Avenue like it, too, had witnessed something that couldn't be undone. Scarlett took half a step back. Her pulse was racing. It wasn't the fact that she'd made a mistake. It was the paralyzing truth that there was no excuse for what she had just done. A second patrol car pulled up behind them. Red and blue lights flickered against her face, painting it in strokes of fire and guilt. Dominic Hayes, her partner, stepped out, frowning, unsure what was going on. Scarlett opened her mouth to speak, but Gabriel spoke first. "Everything's fine, Officer Hayes. We were just pulled over." His words were soft, carried on the breeze, but every syllable slammed into Scarlett's chest like a verdict. No accusation, no disciplinary warning, just intentional silence, and it crushed her. "Am I free to go?" His voice was calm. He didn't look at her, but the question landed like the first strike of a judge's gavel. Scarlett nodded. No words came out. Gabriel gave the faintest nod in return and walked back to his car. No threat, no condemning glance. And somehow, that was the very thing that kept her from sleeping for nights after. 3 days later, Scarlett walked into room A12, West Wing, the place Internal Affairs coldly referred to as the Response Evaluation Unit. There were 3 people inside. Everett Sinclair, senior investigator, low voice, expression unreadable. Vincent Monroe, her direct captain, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the table, not even glancing up as she entered. And Gabriel Vaughn, the man she had struck, the man who hadn't spoken her name since that night. Scarlett sat down. Her shoulders were so tight they felt detached from her own body. Everett opened the file, his voice flat. "We're reviewing the traffic stop from the night of the 14th. Based on initial reports, Officer Scarlett Monroe used force deemed unnecessary." Scarlett swallowed. Her throat burned dry. "He wasn't cooperating," she said. Barely audible, so soft, even she wasn't sure she believed it. For the first time since she'd entered the room, Gabriel looked up. His gaze held no accusation, no resentment, just quiet. "Did I insult you, Officer Monroe?" Scarlett didn't answer. "Did I resist? Threaten? Fight back?" No one moved. Time stopped breathing. Then, Vincent Monroe tapped his finger on the table. His eyes shifted toward her. The question wasn't in the report, but it was hanging in the air, waiting to be answered. "Then why did you hit him?" Scarlett turned her face away. There was no answer, only silence, long and sharp, slicing into her pride like a slow-moving blade. 3 days later, Scarlett's phone buzzed as she sat alone in her empty apartment. The message was from someone she never thought would reach out again. Gabriel Vaughn, Wyndham Creek Park. 10 minutes. Come alone. She hesitated. Her hand hovered above the screen. But then, she grabbed her coat and walked out, not out of duty, but out of conscience. By the time she arrived, the sky had turned a pale ash gray. A few people jogged by. A child held tightly to their mother's hand. Life carried on around her, normal and unbothered, while she braced herself for a confrontation unlike any disciplinary hearing she'd ever faced. Gabriel stood by the iron railing along the creek, hands in his coat pockets, not looking back. You know why I didn't report you that night? His voice cut through the air before she could say a word. Scarlett remained silent. Because if I had, you would have thought I was retaliating. And I didn't want that. I wanted you to sit with it, to live with it, to feel it. She bit her lip. You wanted me to feel guilty? No. He shook his head. I wanted you to think. He finally turned toward her. Not angry, just quietly disappointed. Scarlett, I didn't scream at you. I did something much harder. I let you ask yourself, why? And for the first time, she didn't know where to hide her face. And for the first time, she actually began to think. In her first week of retraining at the Stonemere Training Annex, Scarlett barely said a word. The class wasn't large, just over a dozen people. New recruits, seasoned officers, even a retired captain who'd stepped down over a field mistake. Everyone sat in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they all knew. The most important part hadn't come yet. On day 3, the lead instructor walked in. Anastasia Bennett, a former detective, a black woman whose slow stride was no match for the sharpness in her gaze. A gaze that made the entire room straighten up without a word. She didn't introduce herself. No speeches. She simply picked up the remote and pressed a button. A body cam video lit up the screen. A traffic stop. Late at night. A police officer's voice cut through the silence. Sharp, short, already impatient. A black man in the car, middle-aged, kept his hands on the wheel, eyes forward. Scarlett felt a chill race down her spine. Because that voice sounded just like hers. And the way that man took a deep breath when the officer banged on the window was exactly like Gabriel. No one in the room said a word. Anastasia didn't explain. She just turned and looked at Scarlett. What do you see? Scarlett swallowed hard. Her throat burned. Maybe he just looked like... Anastasia cut her off. Not him. You. I'm asking what you see. The silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was a mirror. And for the first time, Scarlett didn't look away from her own reflection. Class had ended. One by one, the others quietly filed out, leaving Scarlett alone in the last row. She kept staring at the now black screen. The same screen that, minutes ago, had shown a version of herself she never wanted to believe existed. Anastasia Bennett walked over. No words of comfort, no hand on the shoulder. She simply pulled out the chair across from Scarlett and sat down. The overhead light caught strands of gray in her hair, not aging her, but grounding her, like a pillar that didn't flinch in a storm. You know, Anastasia began, a thought never arrives alone. Scarlett looked up. It always brings fear with it, a voice we've mistaken for instinct, but really it belongs to the world around us. She paused, eyes steady. So, where did that thought come from, Scarlett? Scarlett swallowed. No report to lean on, no official statement to shield herself. Just a hollow space inside her, one that now demanded to be filled with truth. Maybe from the first time I was taught to make quick judgments, from the nightly news, from those coffee break conversations at the precinct, where people called it street instinct. She paused. And maybe from me, from a part of me I never wanted to see. Anastasia nodded slowly. Not approval, not condemnation, just acknowledgement. Good. She stood, turned to leave, but stopped at the door. To truly heal, she said, you have to know exactly where the wound is. Scarlett stayed seated. No one asked her to say more. But in that silence, she knew. She had just stepped through a door she could never walk back through again. The day Scarlett returned to the Northmore Division Station, it wasn't raining. But the wind was cold enough to make her palms damp, even before she touched a single thing. She wore the uniform again after nearly 2 months, each button fastened like it was stitching her to a memory. Not all of them good. The main hall was the same, phones ringing, footsteps echoing, the occasional short burst of laughter. But when she pushed the door open, there was a very specific kind of silence. Not loud, not obvious. Just every pair of eyes glanced her way, then looked away. She passed a cluster of familiar officers. No one called her name, but no one turned their backs either. Scarlett walked to her old desk. Everything was still there. The slightly scuffed chair, the unpolished nameplate, and a case file with her name on it, waiting. She set her bag down, pulled out her pen. Just as she was about to open the first file, a shadow passed by, then stopped. Scarlett looked up. Gabriel Vaughn, no command coat, just a black coffee in one hand. He looked at her, just for a moment. "Welcome back." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through everything she'd been holding in. Scarlett pressed her lips together, then nodded. "Thank you, sir." Gabriel didn't say more. He walked away, leaving behind a space that, somehow, no longer felt heavy. She sat down, and for the first time since that night, she took a deep breath and held it. Scarlett Monroe left the main office late Friday afternoon, still holding the new duty roster in her hand. She'd been reassigned to the day patrol unit. No one explained why. No one called it a second chance. But maybe that made it worth even more than forgiveness. She walked past the familiar hallway, the one she used to stride through with the confidence of someone who believed they were always on the right side. Now her steps didn't slow, but she was more aware of every echo her boots left behind. That night, Scarlett sat alone in her small apartment. She reopened the training notes Anastasia had once left for her. Prejudice isn't always something you say out loud. Sometimes, it's just how long you stare at someone and still fail to see anything at all. She remembered Gabriel's eyes that night, not angry, not wounded, just the kind of look that forces you to ask yourself, what did I see and what didn't I? Part of her wanted to end it there, close the chapter, move on. But another part, the part she'd just begun to truly listen to, whispered something different. Don't let it end. Let it begin. Because prejudice doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it shows up in a glance, in a decision made in 3 quiet seconds. And the final question is, do you have the courage to truly look it in the eye? 1 week after returning to duty, Scarlett received a message from a familiar internal number. Wyndham Creek Park, 6:15 p.m. Bring nothing. GV. No subject line, no explanation, just an invitation. And Scarlett knew this wasn't a command. By the time she reached the park, dusk had begun to settle. Under the shade of a tall maple tree by the lake, Gabriel Vaughn stood waiting, hands in his pockets, calm, as if no fracture had ever come between them. Scarlett approached. She didn't know where to begin, but thankfully, she wasn't asked to speak. "Scarlett," he spoke first, "there are some investigations that never make it into the files." She said nothing. "There are actions that can't be forgiven on paper." His eyes softened. His voice was low but not weak. "And there are people who have to change, not because they're told to, but because they can't live with themselves if they don't." She drew in a deep breath. "You didn't punish me." "No," he nodded. "I didn't have to. Because you did something far harder. You held yourself accountable, better than any consequence could." They stood there, not too close, not distant, just side by side, with the lake lights dancing on the surface like quiet witnesses. And in that silence, something shifted. Not the past, but the future. A soft breeze swept through Wyndham Creek Park. Late-season leaves, darkened and dry, drifted steadily to the ground, as if even time had decided to slow down. Scarlett sat on a stone bench. Gabriel stood beside her, eyes fixed on the still surface of the lake, as if reading a page from memory. "You know," he began, his voice low but every word clear, "I've been pulled over 37 times in 5 years." Scarlett turned to him, brows gently furrowed. But Gabriel didn't look back. His gaze stayed on the water. "Not once because I actually broke the law. Sometimes it was a dirty license plate. Sometimes because I was moving suspiciously. Once, just because I signaled a second too late." He sighed, not from exhaustion, but from familiarity. "Even in the neighborhood where I live, where I bought my house, walk my dog, plant my trees, they asked if I really lived there. He gave a soft laugh. I just said, I'm a cop. Lived here long enough to know where it's safe. Scarlett didn't respond, because some truths can't be answered. Gabriel finally turned toward her. Scarlett, I don't need you to feel guilty. I just want to know, have you ever felt small in the one place you were supposed to belong? The question didn't echo. It didn't demand. It simply hung in the air, like a mirror we all must face at least once. Gabriel sat down beside Scarlett on the weathered stone bench by the lake. The space between them wasn't distance anymore. It was a pause, a waiting room for truth. He didn't look at her, just held a small pebble in his hand, turning it gently between his fingers, as if weighing something heavier than words. You could walk away from this, Scarlett, he said, voice low, slow. Call it a lapse in judgment, a moment of lost control, and just keep going. Scarlett didn't respond. Her eyes stayed on the water, but his words sank deep, like they were landing on bone. There's another way, he continued, dropping the pebble to the ground. You could stop, really stop, and look at the exact moment you lost yourself and ask why. Why did I react like that? What was I afraid of? What did I assume about him that I've never had the courage to admit? Gabriel finally turned to her, for the first time all afternoon. You don't have to answer me. You need to answer yourself. And that's the part that hurts the most, but it's also the most real. Scarlett clenched her hands tightly on her lap. She knew. He wasn't forcing her to choose, but not choosing was still a choice. And this time, there would be no one else to blame. Scarlett Monroe arrived at Stonemere Training Annex on a foggy Monday morning. She brought nothing with her but a fresh notebook and a blue ink pen. No one had asked her to come early, but she showed up 30 minutes ahead of time. The classroom was small, 12 people, each one with a past, each one with a reason, each one with a moment they'd stepped off course. There were no introductions, only one instruction. Sit still and listen. Anastasia Bennett, silver-haired, her eyes brighter than her voice, entered the room without a sound. We're not here to study prejudice, she said. We're here to study what makes us believe we don't have any. The room fell silent. Scarlett did too. By the second session, Anastasia played a video, a routine traffic stop, like hundreds of thousands of others. The officer asked questions. The black driver answered. Calm voice, hands on the wheel, no threats, no resistance. But then, the officer glanced at the license, then lingered on the man's face. Just a second too long, and in that second, the whole room went cold. Scarlett lowered her head. No one told her to. No one called her out. No one said her name. But in that moment, she knew. She had once looked at a man in that exact same way. Scarlett Monroe sat in the classroom at Stonemere Training Annex, hands resting on her knees, back straight, but her gaze wandered, adrift, unanchored. On the big screen, a video played, footage from a body cam mounted on an officer's chest, a perspective far too familiar, familiar enough to chill the spine. A black man, mid-40s, dressed in a dark suit, was asked to step out of his vehicle. He complied. No argument, no resistance, no threat, only calm. A calm so steady, so eerily familiar, it unsettled Scarlett. Anastasia Bennett said nothing. She let the video roll, all the way to the moment the officer placed a hand on the man's back and shoved him suddenly without warning. A chair scraped loudly against the classroom floor. Someone exhaled sharply. Scarlett didn't. She didn't need to see the rest. She had lived it. What do you see? Anastasia asked. Scarlett opened her mouth, not to speak, but to swallow back something rising in her throat. I saw a threat, Scarlett said. Her voice cracked at the edges. But he didn't do anything wrong. She slowly looked down at her hands, the same hands that once pressed against the back of a man just like him, on a night just as quiet as this scene. The only difference was, that man pulled out a badge, Chief of Police. And from that moment on, Scarlett's world was never steady again. Not because he yelled, not because he fought back, but because She no longer had any reason to pretend she was right. There was no chalkboard, no punishment, just a small circle of wooden chairs, and one steady, patient gaze from Anastasia Bennett. The woman the entire department once called the mind of justice. Scarlett Monroe sat in silence. In front of her was a simple exercise. Rewrite the report of that traffic stop. Not as a police officer, but as a human being. Anastasia's voice filled the room. Not sharp, not accusatory, just present. Where did that idea come from? Scarlett looked up, and for the first time she didn't flinch. Not from the report, she said slowly, not from his actions. It came from my own mind, from something I assumed before I ever took the time to truly look. Outside the window, a soft drizzle tapped the glass. She continued, this time not a confession of wrongdoing, but an admission of something deeper, a system she had carried inside herself for years, one she had never questioned until now. I thought I was upholding the law, she said, until I realized I was reacting to an image I'd been taught to fear. Anastasia nodded gently. Then today, we're not asking what you did wrong. We're asking, from this day forward, what do you want to do right? Scarlett looked down at the unfinished report in her hands. The pen trembled slightly, but for the first time, every word she wrote wasn't to defend herself, but to reflect, to truly reflect. 2 months later, Scarlett Monroe stepped through the glass doors of the Northmore Division Station. The place that had once seen her raise her voice, shout commands, and the place that had taught her, no badge can protect you from the truth inside yourself. She wasn't in uniform, just a simple gray coat, a slightly crooked name tag, and eyes that no longer looked away, but quietly searched for something in the way others look back. There were no applause, no embraces, just subtle nods. Enough to say, they knew. She had faced something not everyone dares to. At the end of the hallway, Gabriel Vaughn was speaking with a new recruit. He saw her, paused, one beat of silence. Then, just one sentence. Welcome back. This time, with your eyes truly open. Scarlett didn't answer right away. She simply walked up, stood beside him, as if to say, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to begin again. A few forms waited on her desk. A minor case to review. Nothing extraordinary. But beneath it all, a heart that had finally learned not to judge what it hadn't yet understood. Down the brightly lit hallway of Northmore Division Station, footsteps echoed in steady rhythm, each one reflected in the glass panels like long, unfinished breaths. Scarlett Monroe stood by the water cooler, a cup of coffee in her hand. But there was no taste left on her tongue. Conversations continued. People nodded, polite as ever. But the silence between them weighed heavier than any accusation. Then, Gabriel Vaughn walked past. He kept going, didn't turn his head. Scarlett lowered her eyes, about to step away, when Gabriel stopped, turned, just a fraction of a moment, but enough to draw every glance in the room. He looked at her. No judgment, no emotion, just a gaze. So clear she saw herself reflected in it. Then he said softly, like a nod from the past, welcome back. No explanation, no added words. And then he walked away, as if her very presence here was already the answer to everything. Scarlett stood still, then slowly placed her coffee down and followed, not quickly, not urgently, just enough to show that she no longer needed to prove anything, except the quiet decision to keep choosing what's right. Scarlett stood at her old desk in Northmore Division Station. Everything was just as it had been 2 months ago. No one had removed her name from the roster, but no one had slipped a spare coffee pod into her drawer either, like they used to. Quietly, she pulled the drawer open and took out a small wooden plaque. Courage isn't the absence of mistake, it's what you choose after. It was a gift from Anastasia Bennett, the instructor who never lectured, but asked the kind of questions that forced Scarlett to answer herself over and over again. Scarlett walked to the internal bulletin board, where officers usually posted shift photos and safety reminders. She pinned the plaque dead center. No announcement, no permission, just placed it there. Behind her, Gabriel Vaughn watched. He didn't say anything at first. Then he stepped forward, stopping beside her. His voice was low, steady, cutting clean through the noise without ever raising. I didn't put your badge back on your desk, because this isn't an ending. We don't forgive the past, but we can choose how we stand in front of it. Scarlett turned to him, not to ask for approval, but to nod, like someone who finally understood. A second chance isn't meant to erase the mistake. It's meant to prove you're willing to live forward without repeating it. Scarlett stepped out of the training office as the morning light filtered through the glass ceiling of Stonemere Annex, casting a soft glow across the notebook she always carried. On the last page, scribbled the night before, was a quiet realization. Prejudice isn't always loud. It can be a glance, a passing assumption, a mispronounced name, a voice left unheard, and sometimes a slap that felt justified at the time. But today, for the first time, she didn't lower her gaze. She passed Gabriel in the hallway. And this time she was the one who nodded first. No words were needed, because the real answer doesn't live in excuses. It lives in how we choose to live differently the moment we realize we were wrong. And what about you? Have you ever looked at someone through a lens of bias you didn't even know you carried? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which part of this story made you stop and think? If you believe the world needs more stories that awaken empathy and challenge perspective, consider subscribing. Not for the views, but because change starts with the smallest things. Because sometimes 3 seconds is all it takes to change someone forever, or to lose a chance you never knew you had. In a world where prejudice doesn't always shout, but slips in quietly through a glance, a fleeting assumption, or an action that seems lawful, the story of Scarlett Monroe and Gabriel Vaughn reminds us of a truth many avoid. Sometimes the thing that needs to change isn't out there. It's in how we choose to see the world. Scarlett wasn't a bad person. She was a young, dedicated officer who believed her actions were justified. But the slap she delivered, not out of fear, but in response to a man's calmness, revealed something she had never dared to face. She hadn't acted in the name of law. She had reacted from an unconscious bias. And that man was the chief of police. But what's most powerful in this story is not the consequences she faced. It's the choice Gabriel made not to retaliate, but to offer her a mirror and a chance. And the choice Scarlett made, not to deny, but to face it head on. Through a journey of deep self-reflection, she didn't just apologize, she changed. So what's the real lesson here? That growth sometimes begins the moment we stop turning away from what we've done. That true goodness isn't about never making mistakes, but about having the courage to make it right from exactly where we went wrong. And that sometimes forgiveness isn't a gift we give to others. It's something we offer ourselves, so we can move forward without carrying the weight of who we used to be.